Hello there, it's Ben with Studio on the Lake. Hey, this is number 3, I think, post-fire. And this is going to be a little bit on how to carve a mini loon with just a knife, and I'll talk about the knife in just a second here. I'm back in the stuga, which is Swedish for a little house, and there's what we're going to end up with at the end of this with just using a knife. So as always, starts with design. I've got a log of basswood. All the basswood is fine. It was in another building. And to answer Jordy, answer your question, some of the cottonwood I lost, but I've still got several pieces of it that were fine. So hey, this is the bench knife that I ordered, and I don't like it. That's the one I'm using today, and that's the one that came in, and I thought it was a different knife. But one of the things you'll notice on that, it talks about roughing knife or a carver's knife. That's the knife that I like, and it's hard to find, and I'll talk about that in just a second there. But the difference between those knives is that part right there. See how that blade goes all the way down into the handle? See how that one has the little tang on it? It's a little different profile. I don't like the tang. I like it without the tang in that one. And the only way to get that is by getting a set. And I'll talk about the set. I'm going to do another knife video tonight when I get done working, because I can't download a video here at work for some reason. So without further ado, here's a loon. You don't have a bandsaw. You don't have anything. This I actually cut out with a Sawzall. And I didn't show you that because it's kind of along the lines of what I do with that damn grinder. It's not safe, and it's not prudent, and as you can see, it does a pretty rough cut. The pattern in my lap there is the next video, and that's just a little bird done with a knife too. So this thing was a little bit too wide, so I drew some center lines down on it, and then I took probably an inch off of this one side, and I did that with an abused Swedish Sloyd knife. For the big carving, and that's the Sloyd knife there with me. It managed to make it through the fire, and it required only a little bit of touch-up, but it does some pretty good damage. You'll notice later on, and since this is a teaching video, I did make that cut a little deeper than I should have, right there on the body, and you see me later dealing with that. I ended up taking that out, and in hindsight, I would have not taken that down as much on that portion right there. But hey, what the heck, right? Another thing to note is I'm blocking this completely out now. Had I had the bandsaw or a scroll saw, 2 of which I did have, and they are no longer, and they haven't yet been replaced, I would have taken this over to those and cut this pattern or this blank a little further down on that. But just a heads up for you guys that don't happen to have a bandsaw or a scroll saw, and you're trying to get a blank. You can do, this is proof that you can do a blank. You just don't end up with as close a product as you want, but a knife and a chunk of wood doesn't even really need to be cut out. You can carve that down or whittle that down. You can see that this is all whacked out, and I'm making it symmetrical at this point. And I ran most of this video 2 times. The intent is to show you how this goes along, not necessarily each cut. One of the things that there's a lot of great carvers out there, and most of them are caricature carvers, and they work only with a knife, and they occasionally might use a chisel or 2 in there, but they don't do the power carving stuff. And one of the things that I never quite understood, and these guys have a heck of a following. I'm ridiculous. They're picking up 40 or 50,000 views in a couple hours on some of their characters that they're doing, and they are spectacular. And I'm not poo-pooing what they do, but they'll go definitive cut for cut. And then they'll describe that cut. They'll say, well, I'm going to take this corner off, and I'm going to do that with a slicing cut, and then they'll go ahead and make that cut. In my world, you learn how to use a knife, and the way to do that is to grab a block of wood or a piece of wood or a limb and start whittling, for lack of better reference, And there are many carvers in the world that get offended by someone saying, "Oh, you're a whittler." I don't think you should worry about that. Although I do kind of think a whittler is the one of my relatives growing up on a ranch in Oregon, pulling out a pocket knife, grabbing a stick off the ground, and turning it into a toothpick over the course of a half an hour while they're talking to you there. So that's what I would consider whittling. This I would consider carving, but to me, you call it whatever you want. You get the picture. Artists are sometimes kind of fickle on what they think is right and wrong and the whole 9 yards, and they just need to get over themselves and do what they do. So I put the center lines on this guy, and if I were to describe a cut, I don't like to describe cuts. That was kind of a rocking, slicing cut. This they probably wouldn't recommend you do, pulling that towards you. And I ran most of this video in 2 times. And there you see I'm working on that gouge that I put in the side there where the body transitions into the neck. And I'm just kind of working this guy around. I'm really trying to get his head out of there. And then another interesting note, you'll notice I keep stopping, like right there, and I turn that thing all around and look at it. I do that when I'm power carving also because I'm looking through the design of the pattern. And you saw where this pattern came from. It came from a pen sitting there on a chunk of wood. Yeah, this is kind of neat. The head is and the body are in one piece. It works fine because the grain runs from the tail through the end of the bill there. I don't typically do one piece on the large loons, and one of the reasons is when you cut it out, that head sticking up there. If you got a 2 or 3 foot piece of basswood, you really waste a lot of wood on the back side of that trying to cut it out in one piece. And then the second part of that is I like to hold the head in my hands, and when you put the head on there, you can go ahead and place it onto the big body of the loon, and you can turn it just a little bit, and that's a little bit. This one's got kind of a turn to him because I like to leave a little character in there rather than straight. But this was kind of fun. This knife is not up to par as far as sharpness, and you heard me whine about it in the last couple of videos. You can see that it is cutting. It is doing basically what it's supposed to do. But if you were to take up knife carving with that particular knife and at the particular sharpness that it's at right now, which is all I can do because I don't have the strops, the compound for the strops, nor do I have the whetstones or the diamond stones to get that excellent shape and cutting ability on that knife. Now, once I get those in and I sharpen that knife up, it'll probably be just fine. But like I said, I don't like that little tang that's in the corner of that, so this will probably become a secondary knife, something that I use in the background. It may even end up being a knife that I set eyes and that sort of stuff with, and scrape and abuse the blade, and then if I have to, I'll sharpen it back up. But when I get back to our condo tonight that they provide for us down here in Iowa City, or in Iowa, I will download part of a video that I had on tools, and then I'm going to do a little knife, kind of what the heck is this, because the only way to get the bench carving knife that I like now appears to be through getting a weird set of 2, and that'll be kind of a fun little video for the rest of you. And there were a couple viewers 4 or 5 months ago that were asking about knives, and I sent them to the Ramelson. Of course, any of the knives work, and particularly the ones that there are probably 100 knife makers out there at various different prices that will make a knife, and you have to decide if what you like. And then I'll discount some of you who are knife collectors. I'm not a knife collector. I don't have 12 carving knives. I tend to use them like a screwdriver I have 20 screwdrivers in any given toolbox, with several toolboxes laying around, and half of them have been abused because they're a lever, they're a pry bar, they're a punch. You get the idea. They're a tool, and knives are the same way. To me, they're a tool. Don't intentionally abuse them, but don't treat them like they're a family heirloom either. These knives are relatively thin. When you get the blades thin on them, and as you sharpen them down, if you keep a knife for 7 or 8 years, you'll notice that the blade's getting quite thin. But once you get it sharp to the sharpness that you like it, it really only needs honing from that point on until you do something abusive with it or nick it or something like that. And then you might have to get your whetstones out one more time. So you see that I'm looking through this loon, and I'm kind of working the neck down. I haven't spent time on the head necessarily yet. I'm getting the profile of how that comes in there. And if you've done some loons before or seen loons, really the money shot is in the way that head is kind of canted back, and the bill is typically a little bit up in the air. They've got kind of an air of mystery about them. The loons are back here on the lake. We've got a pair that comes back every year, and every 3 or 4 years they are successful in raising a loon chick or a baby loon. Typically they will lay 2 eggs, and 4 out of 5 times a predator gets those eggs, or the chick will hatch. And then in our case, we've got muskies and pikes in the lake here, and the poor chick becomes floating bait and gets swallowed up by a 40-inch fish. Kind of a sad deal, but my understanding, we've got a couple of folks and an old guy that monitors the loons here on the lake, and according to him, we did have a chick last year survive, and it made it to adulthood, so that's a good thing. Each of the lakes up here, unless they're a little bit larger, only have 1 pair of loons on the lake, and loons will live to be 20 or 30 years old, and they are protected. They're kind of fun. This year I might, when I'm out fishing sometime, I may take a camera out with me as they mess around. But up here in the north woods of Wisconsin, loons are certainly one of the birds that sell. So there you have it, and this one's going to be a small one. I used to, many years ago when I was in the military and stationed at West Point, we had a wood carving shop across the Hudson at a little tourist town called Cold Springs. And this is something that I would do while I was sitting in the shop as kind of a demonstration. I had a wood carving bench and an area railed off in the corner of the shop, and rather than sit there and stare at people as they look through the carvings, I would sit behind that bench and I would carve little birds and nonsense stuff, and then on occasion hand them to a kid or someone who was interested in the carvings. But this is something that I would do back then. They're not really useful other than they're a knick-knack paddywhack. They sit on a shelf somewhere, and you can see that there's a difference in the way that I approach the carving. Some of the stuff that I'm doing now, and as I get going later on, are going to be smaller cuts. They're going to be delicate, and they're more of finish cuts. And what's interesting, when I start doing the power carving again, I'm going to show the difference between that. And there's really not a whole lot of difference to the way that I approach carving with a knife or power carving. And I like them both equally well. I've stated before, I tend to gravitate towards the power carving simply for the time. And I feel handicapped. I mean, there are many points in this project in the last 3 or 4 where I just have the knife available to me, and I would have certainly loved to reach over and grab that power carver with a burr and fine tune something. I can do stuff with the power carver that I can't do with a knife. But there are things that I can't do with the power carver that I can do with a knife, and that has to do with the planes that are left on that. If you pull up character carving and look at any of the folks doing character carving, and the one that I would steer you to is Gene Messer. He's the godfather of YouTube and character carving, and an awesome guy. So Gene Messer, look him up, and he carves characters, and primarily with a knife. I don't think I've seen him with a power carver, and that's a good thing because that stuff's messy. This got chips all over, but they're not quite the same as dust. But if you look at some of Gene's stuff, you'll notice that there are planes and knife marks, and that's part of the beauty of carving with a knife. You can't get that. Well, you can, but you're imitating the planes and the facets on there done with a knife if you're doing it with a power carver. A power carver is just a glorified way of sanding, I think, in my world. So you see I'm making smaller cuts. I'm refining this guy. I do sand him and take the knife marks away because the loon doesn't necessarily need those knife marks. Early on, 25 years ago, I have some decoys that were done just with chisels and a knife, and not necessarily detailed with the feathers, and that in and of itself is kind of a neat look. And you could see that this guy, at pretty much any point in here, you could stop and leave all of those facets and knife marks on there, and someone could tell that this was actually carved or whittled to use that. And like I said, I don't care what you call it, as long as you do it. So those are little slicing cuts, and I'm just taking the bumps off of the face or the head and starting to get the head around. So I think though that there was a bird. It's kind of a goofy little bird, and you'll see that video in a couple days as soon as I get done editing it. But I put some stuff together on the knife, and I hope I'm not boring you by whining about the knife. There are some folks out there. If you look up the knives, there's knife makers that have back orders of 2 or 3 years for their knife, and you're going to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 for that. I'm a big fan of these Ramelsons just because I've used them for 15 or 20 years. They typically will come out of the package razor sharp and ready to go with a good profile on them. As you know, if you've been picking up and following the saga of me getting back into carving after the fire, this knife didn't come that way. So the one time you need it to be ready coming out of the gate, it's not, and that's the case. And I'll talk about those knives, but these are $20, and you really can't go wrong for $20. You also can't make a knife for $20 unless you use some other abusive material. Of course, to make knives, you have to have the stuff to grind them. You have to have the stuff to profile the blade. You have to have the woodworking equipment to make the handle, and you need to use some kind of high carbon steel so you can harden it to 55, 65 Rockwell hardening. And for that, you need heat treating, i.e. a torch or an oven, and then you need the oil. So as you can see, $20, when you add all that up to I'm going to build a knife, might not be a good idea. You can use a hacksaw blade. One way to do it is to use a knife blank of something that broke, a kitchen knife or something with the good steel on it. We spent many years in Germany, and I'm a big fan of Henkel's. I made fun of my dad. He had a, many years ago, 10, 15 years ago, I was telling him how nice Hinkles were and whatnot on a ranch out in Oregon when we came back from Germany. And he wanted to argue about it. He said, no, this is the best knife that I've ever had. I got it in Iceland 50 years ago or 40 years ago. And it had no stainless left on it. It just kind of had that dull look. It was extremely sharp, and it was a chef's knife. And of course, being young, I argued with him that no, the Hinkles were much better. So fast forward 20 years, my dad passed away, and Mom was moving off the ranch. I was looking at that knife that he was talking about, and guess what? It was a Hinkle that he had bought many, many years ago. So we were arguing about the same thing. Fun, silly story. Stuff that you learn when you get old. Some of the crap you used to argue about didn't make any sense. And one of the beauties of growing old is you can listen to younger kids, high schoolers and college students, and learning about things in the world, and they're explaining to you something, and you just know they're full of crap, but if you're smart, you just smile. And if you think about it, you did the exact same thing when you were young. There's a moral, the moral of the story. So on this guy, I typically, when I would do these, a good seller many years ago was I would do these in California redwood. When I was out at Fort Irwin in California, you could get a redwood 2x4, pretty much the same as you can get a pine 2x4 nowadays, and it had the beautiful reddish color. Redwood is a nice wood to carve if you can get a hold of it. And I would make little smoothie loons out of the redwood, and on the back I would do this pattern right here, a little V cut on the back of the neck there, or on the back to delineate the wings, and then I would do a V cut under the wings, and you can see pretty much the same pattern. So the wings cross over on this, and I'm just taking a V cut out of that. I'm going to sand that all down relatively smooth, as you'll see later on. That is a if you're bound and determined to figure out what kind of cut that is, that's a V cut. Again, all the cuts to me look relatively the same. I would drive myself nuts. You see me flipping that knife all the way around, holding it in different ways. But the one thing that is common to that is my left hand, with me being right-handed, is always away from the other. And kind of got a V cut going down in there, and you'll notice that I carved this thing relatively smooth, or relatively to shape, before I did the V cuts. And then I'll just come back and feather that cut down into the body and into the tail there. There's the feather coming in. And you can see I don't quite have the bottom of the body going into the tail finished yet. But there's my little slicing cuts, and you can notice that that thumb comes in there. And I talked about when this is 2 times as fast, it looks like my hand's perilously close to the blade, that left hand, and it's not, I assure you. I would recommend, if you're first starting carving and you made it this far, and this is the video you pick, God bless you. But I would recommend you wear a carving glove on your opposite hand until you get to the point where you're confident. Now you see I sanded that guy down. We're coming to the end. You can see the profile there. He is a loon, and I don't know if I would have probably taken a little bit more out of the neck there, but there's a miniature loon. They don't look nearly as nice, in my opinion, once they're painted. I wouldn't put eyes in this one simply because it's kind of stylistic. And then here's the beauty. If you don't have a wood burner, which I should have when I get back from Iowa this time, should have that dual from PGL Enterprises. I've got the Ram microcarver there, and I won't have to scratch my initials in like you would when you're 17, 15, 17 years old, and you finally talk some girl into hanging out in a field with a tree. So you took out your pocket knife, you scratched her initials, your initials with a big plus between them and a heart on a tree. And then if you're a Hallmark commercial, you went back 35 years later when you both have gray hair and you're fat and you look, and the thing that was 2 feet off the ground with your initials carved in it is now 8 feet off the ground. So that's the way I put that in there, the way you would do that with a girl. And then I grabbed a pen and signed my name to it. So as Jordy Johnson will tell you, you should check him out. You should check out Just Carve Rob. Always go over there and look at Mike at Stinnett Sticks. Cleve's Backyard Wood Carving. Heck, the list is outrageously long of great carvers putting out YouTube videos. And so here's a loon done with a knife. And stick around for the rest of the videos. Hey, thanks a lot. This has been Ben with Studio on the Lake.